And one of the challenges here is that there seem to be factors involved that may actually be beyond comprehension, but certainly it's all happening in the mind. So there's no mechanistic process that's really easy to nail
That's
down.
true, yeah. Welcome to the Deadly Departed podcast, where the veil between the living and the dead is just a whisper away. I'm Jock, and along with my colleagues in Paranormal Daily News, we will be your guides through the shadowy realms of the paranormal and the unexplained. In each episode, we will dive into the eerie and the enigmatic with the help of today's leading experts in parapsychology, science, and the supernatural. Prepare to uncover the secrets that lurk in the dark and explore the mysteries that defy explanation. Let's embark on this journey now. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Jock. I'm here with my good friend Craig Weiler, the science editor of PDN. Craig, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Jock. It's wonderful to be back on the podcast and talking again. This is just great fun.
Before we jump into what we're going to talk about, I just want to say this is Memorial Day. Memorial Day, and you may be listening to this after Memorial Day because we're not going to be publishing this, but let's just take a time. It doesn't matter to me. I'm an ex-veteran. Memorial Day is every day. I remember those that have gone before us. I remember those that have fought in wars before us, and that's the reason that we can do this. It's the reason we can sit down and do this podcast and talk about things that we're passionate about, because we're free, because the men and women of that era and even now have given so much, given their lives that we may be free, and that's something that we must remember. And so if you're listening to this after Veterans Day, then please, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, two different days. To me, they're both the same because we're veterans and we're remembering them, but happy Memorial Day and happy Veterans Day. Whatever time you're listening to this, please remember our veterans, our soldiers, those that have gone before us every day of your lives, because it's because of them that we're free. And today, guys, we're going to jump into a really juicy episode. So Craig recently put up a post in a Reddit forum, which God only knows why he did this, right? Because this was a skeptical forum. And I'm of the opinion, I've always been we do need skeptics. And I tend to, I don't like to use that cliche that, I'm a skeptical medium or anything. I like to use the term that I have a skeptical interest at things. I don't just accept everything as real. Even in paranormal phenomena and parapsychology, and in the work I do is a medium, there has to be a level of empirical evidence. But I am absolutely flabbergasted at some of the responses that actually came from that post. And so today we're going to jump into why we really need a balanced approach to science and also paranormal or parapsychological science as well. Craig, why on earth did you just decide to go and do it and write a post in a skeptical forum?
I did this on a whim. So a little bit of background for the listeners here is that I had a book that I wrote in 2013 about a science conference that took place in TED Talks, where they banned a couple of talks, one of them by Rupert Sheldrake and the other one by Graham Hancock. And in the book, I followed skepticism. And this is actually what I'm known for in parapsychology, is my takedown of organized skepticism. And so one of the things that I did along the way was I really got to understand the skeptic community rather well. And so when I talk about this, this comes from long experience. I've had hundreds of conversations with skeptics, and I do understand a lot about their process.
No, I honestly, so as I mentioned, Craig, I'm kind of, you've heard me so many times. I think we need our skeptics. There's certain skeptics that I'm not drawn to. There's good skeptics out there that I think that are open-minded, like Chris French, even though he's really in a skeptical camp. He's open-minded, and Cal Cooper, who's quite skeptical, but also he's open-minded. They want to see this research. I think there's a great divide, from understanding the research. And what I want to kind of jump into, and this isn't the same, I think, I admit that I have biases, but I haven't seen bias as bad in the skeptical and this. Let's not label it skeptical, but in the scientific community, I've seen really, really, really bad bias that they're not willing to even entertain what we have and the data that we have in parapsychological inquiry and parapsychological research, where there have been a number of approaches. We've had mixed method approaches, we've got quantitative approaches, but and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But why do you think that it's just they just refute everything? They will not look at the data that we have. They will not even entertain it. We need to understand why they're so biased and what their approach.
So first of all, in the scientific community, in parapsychology, they've kind of divided the skeptics up into two camps. One of them are actual skeptics, and the other one are scoffers. Now, what Jock was talking about the Reddit thread that I was on was they're mostly scoffers. They don't look at the evidence. They seem to revel in their ignorance of it, and they're incredibly insulting and just basically not open to anything else, from any information from anybody else, because to them we're all crazy and not worthy of any respect. And of course, because we're crazy and we're not worthy of any respect, all of our data is crazy and not worthy of any respect. And so you have a situation with the skeptics where everything skeptical has 100% credibility and everybody else has zero credibility. And when you have people with that point of view, there's no getting through them because nothing you say can possibly make any difference to them. And this is the crowd that I was running into on Reddit.
So let's kind of. I want to kind of refute some of the things because we know of a great study that's well known in the parapsychology community on Etzel Cardeña did research, and we've got that where there's been empirical evidence, and also that a lot of the research that he's did has been replicable, and there are there researchers that have been able to replicate, but in the same token, there are researchers that haven't been able to replicate. I have my own theory on that, but obviously there is maybe a potential heavy bias there. But when we can replicate these studies, which has been proven, why are we still fighting against this battle that seems to be going nowhere?
Well, it's a pretty easy it's pretty easy to describe here. Is that this when you have skeptics that are 100% stubborn all the time, your data is not going to get through. And what we see in the skeptical community is talking points, which are a media thing that we're all familiar with, where you take a statement and you just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. And one of them is that the studies in parapsychology are not replicable, that as you tighten the controls, the effects disappear. And this is something that they've repeated over and over and over again. Now, this doesn't match the data at all.
No, it
This is just
doesn't.
no, it doesn't. It's a bald-faced lie, particularly when you're looking at something like the Ganzfeld telepathy studies.
The Ganzfeld studies are actually a prime example because the data, it is replicable. It has been proven. But then you have somebody that and I'm not going to mention any names because I don't want to give them airtime, but you have then researchers that jump into it. And my theory is, Craig, that they're so biased and they're so skeptical that they get in the way somehow.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you have an organization, the Center of Inquiry, the Center for Inquiry, my apologies, that is an atheist organization, and they're skeptics. And basically, they turn all of their media attention towards downplaying and trashing the results in parapsychology. They've been at it for a very long time. This organization was created in the 70s, and over time, they've gotten into Wikipedia, where they have editors constantly working to do the same thing. And they're basically promoting their point of view of the world and trashing everybody else's in order to advance their ideas. It's a lot like evangelicals and evolution, where you have somebody constantly pushing their point of view because it's very important to them personally.
Yeah. Which
So
creates a massive amount of bias in itself.
it does, yeah. And it creates a lot of confusion in the media because they're constantly getting two different stories. Now, the skeptics have a better media presence, and so they generally win through public relations rather than winning through science. Very frustrating for people on the parapsychology side, but there's nothing to be done for it.
And there's also, I think it's not like we're without our problems in parapsychology, because there seems to be also a great divide between parapsychology and transpersonal psychology, and even from transpersonal psychology and normal psychology. Well, we'd say normal, but other forms of psychology. I'm a great believer that I would like to be able to see transpersonal and parapsychology work together, because I think there's a great synergy between them, massive synergy. And albeit that a lot of the research is phenomenological and experiential, I think there has to be an importance put on experience, because even in anomalous phenomena, your world can be shaken if you experience something that can't really be explained. And I think along with this, the skeptical camp, if you like, is a lot of them have never had any of these experiences, because I found over the years that there are many skeptics who have and I could mention some of them that have experiences that change their whole direction of their research, change their whole, I would say, belief system. It rocks their world, but they're open enough to start to go down that way. For instance, you can look at the awakened brain, okay, where that research was done. I can't remember her name now, but she's been on the podcast here with us as well, and Dr. Miller. So she's did some fascinating research in neuropsychology and the implications of the brain, and that totally shocked our world, rocked our world, and that's moved. And that's just one example, but there's many other examples where there have been skeptics who have had an experience. So maybe the issue is that none of them have got an experience, so they're totally biased and they're coming from a place of ignorance. But we really, really, really need to join forces between experience and empirical evidence to be able to maybe even generate a new methodology or a new way of researching and bringing parapsychology, science, and other forms of psychology into the mix. But why we're not willing to create these bridges. Hopefully, within transpersonal psych and parapsychology, that bridge is being created. I do see signs of that. But as far as the science community is concerned, we're trying to build bridges, but they won't build them back.
Well, first, the first point that I want to make here, which I think is an important one, is that this is an area where skepticism does active harm. When you have people denying the existence of anomalous experiences, you are screwing with people's minds. This is a form of gaslighting, and what we know that people do have anomalous experiences. There are actually journals out there, scientific journals, that document these anomalous experiences. The Journal of Anomalous Experiences is one of them. And so you have this crossover between psychology and parapsychology at that point, because when people have these experiences, if they don't have the scientific and mental framework to accept them, it is world shaking for them, and it is difficult for them to reconcile it. For example, if you have a strong anomalous experience, let's say that you had a very close friend or a spouse die, and then you see an apparition of that person at some point, you could think that you're going crazy, when in fact it's not a normal experience, but it's not outside of what happens with people. It's unusual, but it's not unheard of. And these sorts of things are important to be able to integrate for people so that these experiences don't rock their world, that they can treat them as normal, and that the life can go on rather than feeling crazy. And this is just it, there's all kinds of harm with skeptics not acknowledging these experiences.
But if you look at the scientists now, and I mentioned Lisa Miller, Dr. Lisa Miller, who is phenomenal, who that rocked her world and it kind of changed the whole direction in which she was doing. And then the one that I couldn't remember was Marjorie Willicott, who was a neuroscientist, and then that totally changed her paradigm and changed her direction. And phenomenal researcher. Her book Infinite Awareness is great. I'd recommend it to anybody. In fact, that's maybe one that we'll review in some point. But you've got these scientists who are willing to play the game, and even skeptics like Chris French is not totally dissing anomalous phenomena. Rupert Sheldrake has done so many, morphic resonance or all his research and everything else. His research is replicable.
Yes, it is.
And these scientists are willing to change their direction.
Yes.
Maybe not so much Chris French, but he is open.
Yeah. So Chris French is a skeptic that engages with parapsychology. For the listeners who don't know who he is, he's been engaging with parapsychologists for a long time. This is actually unusual among skeptics,
especially with Rupert Sheldrake, because he's engaged with him a lot.
Yeah, so this is unusual with skeptics. First of all, Chris French is the only skeptic who does this. The only person that's even maybe slightly in the same league is another academic, Richard Weissman. But what's interesting is
he's more hardened skeptic, though.
He's more hardened skeptic. But the interesting thing is when you look at how Professor Chris French, emeritus, when you look at how he sees parapsychology, and because he's had so much contact with it, what you see is a very nuanced and complicated view of the field. So he's still skeptical, but on the other hand, he sees a lot of the information, and so he doesn't take a super hardened position. And more importantly, he has an end game for parapsychology, something almost no other skeptic does, which is to say, he says, if you do these things, then I think it'll be acceptable to me. In other words, I think I'll believe the results if you get this far. Now, I have a problem with that with most skeptics because they usually just start moving the goalposts.
I was just about to say that, because this is normally, and we've seen that in the past, well, if you do this and then you reach it, yeah, but you need to add this, and then everything keeps moving and they're never happy in the end. But at least he does engage, and at least he's willing to. There was a great, and maybe we can link it actually in the show notes. There was I don't know, you probably watched, I watched it as well, but there was a great debate between him and Rupert Sheldrake, and I believe it was at the University of Cambridge, and I did find it good because he did open up. And I'm sure it was him. It was Chris French when it wasn't Wiseman. I think it was Chris French. And I do believe that he engaged, and his end potential last thought was, I'm not going to shut the door to this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to look at the data and see where it goes and see what can be measured. Because at the end of the day, science is what can be measured.
Yes.
And also, parapsychology is really epistemological, and it's about what it can be measured as well.
Yes.
And we need to maybe bring that into an experiential component as well, because there's a lot that can tell us from experience. And as I've always said, experience trumps theory. Once you've had the experience, it can knock your theory out of the way.
Yeah. For our listeners, I think I need to add a little bit more context here about the science of parapsychology. Psychic ability is really difficult to test for. It's probably one of the most difficult things, and this is one of the reasons why controversy continues is they've never been able to create an easily replicable experiment with parapsychology. They come fairly close with a few things. The staring studies were by Rupert Sheldrake. The Gunsfeld, which is a slightly more complicated study. But all of these things, in none of these studies can you simply run the experiment and get a positive result every single time. It just doesn't happen. So sometimes sometimes you'll have a strong effect, sometimes you have a weak effect. Then you need to bunch all the studies together to find out that you
know, Craig, I would say the same of science, though. I would say the same of science. I would say no matter what the research that they do in science, even if it's replicable, they're not going to replicate the exact data every single time or the exact thing. I mean, I see it from... I work with scientists and the other side of things that I do, and I see the research that they do, and it's replicable to a degree, but it's not guaranteed because there's a lot of conditions that go into it, and there could be environmental conditions, there could be biological conditions. It's not always going to be the same. So aren't they just calling the kettle black?
To a certain extent, yeah, there's definitely a double standard there. However, I will say that psychic ability is particularly tricky, and one of the challenges here is that there seem to be factors involved that may actually be beyond comprehension, but certainly it's all happening in the mind, so there's no mechanistic process that's really easy to nail down.
That's true, yeah.
There's a lot of black box stuff happening with psychic ability, and actually Dean Radin, probably the top expert on psychic ability in the world, has said that this is really, really tricky stuff. That one time, he'll have like a set of 5 different psychic criteria, and on one study, criteria A goes off the charts, and on the next study he does everything exactly the same, and criteria B goes off the charts, and then he does it again and C goes off the charts. Now all of this stuff demonstrates psychic ability, but it's all squeaking out in different directions, making it difficult to nail down, and most importantly, it does not seem to be terribly predictable. And this is one of the things that gives skeptics of psychic ability room to maneuver and room to discredit. When in actuality, it's just a really difficult phenomena to measure with science.
This is why I think as well that we need to really have a serious look at experiential phenomena and blend that in with what you can measure. And I think that's possible. I do believe it's possible. But of course, that's taking a massive leap. And that's also maybe taking a massive leap of faith as well, because you're asking, even in the parapsychology field, people to have a certain amount of faith or have a certain amount of willingness to change that paradigm, to change the approach. But I think if we're going to break through in science, we need to look at other avenues. We need to look at new approaches. We need to be willing to open up and perhaps look at a phenomenological data more, as long as there's, empirical evidence that can be brought into that pattern. Some of the studies that have been out there, as you mentioned, Gansfeld, there's empirical data. There's empirical data with the staring studies. There's empirical data with other studies. There's been studies all over the world where we've managed to, in afterlife studies, in mediumship, there's elements of empirical data as well. We need to get to a point. We need skeptics. Don't get me wrong. We need them, right? Mm-hmm. As much as it is painful to say, we need them, because at the end of the day, in our own way, we're skeptic of them, right? Because they're skeptics of everything that we're doing, and we're kind of skeptics of everything that they're doing. So, there is an imbalance where we need to find some harmony between us. Science, I don't use the word skeptics really, but science is skeptical of what we do, and we can also be skeptical of what they do. So we're just the same. You know,
Well,
it's
no,
and we are really.
I would disagree, and the reason is because from my experience with skeptics, one of the challenges with them is that when you're dealing with a materialistic mindset, you tend to discount things like belief as not being part of it, and in fact, belief is a huge part of studying psychic ability. If you don't get that part, that what's going on in your mind is going to affect your experimental results, then everything's going to look like weird stuff to you. But in fact, in empirical studies, what they've been able to show is that belief actually matters. There are some studies where you have a test where both psi missing, which is when you psi missing basically is when you can't hit the target to save your life, to the point where that's a psychic ability. And if you measure those against people who can hit the target, what you find is that people who believe in psychic ability do well to the point of statistical significance, and people who don't believe it do poorly to the point of statistical significance. So
I would challenge that. I would challenge that, right? Because, and I can't remember the study, but there has been studies, and I need to dig this out, but there has been studies where there actually have been individuals in a study that don't believe in psychic ability that have scored quite high. And it shocked them, right? Because they don't necessarily have a belief in it, but what they've actually done, what they've taken part of, this was something recently that I read. I'll need to dig out the paper, but what they had taken part, I think it was a study in Europe, what they had taken part of actually showed that it didn't matter. They still had the ability to score high on these psychic tests. So I would say that it's not all about belief, right? And that's just my personal opinion. If you believe it, then obviously there's an element of you that you're believing in the power of it. You're believing that you can do it, and you have an expectation that you're going to sky high, but that you're going to score high. But also, I think there's an element where if you don't believe it, but you actually get the data that shows there's something there, it may change your whole way of looking at things. And I've seen it. I've seen skeptics who have scored, and I don't want to use the word skeptics, but people who don't believe in psychic ability that have scored relatively high and done fairly well. So I don't think we can say that it's all about belief.
Okay. So granted, it's not all about belief, but this is an effect that shows up regularly in psychic studies.
Granted.
And it's called the differential effect. I actually, to me, it looks like a mirror world effect, where you have people actually living in different worlds based upon their beliefs, because the skeptics will generally miss, and the psychics will generally
they live
hit.
in their own world as well. But again, that's me just being skeptic of their world.
Yeah, but I mean, this is where belief is shown to have a real world effect. And so, my point is that psychic ability, because of this, can be difficult to study. For example, if you have a general population and you're looking at the psychic ability of 100 people, if you don't break this down by belief, it shows no psychic ability at all. But if you do break it down by belief, you can show that some people are doing well and others are doing less than well. So it's complicated.
Sorry if you can hear that bleeping there. Somebody's messaging me, and I actually turned on Do Not Disturb, so I don't know why they're messaging me. This is interesting. I would love to say that we're making breakthroughs. I'd love to say that we're breaking, but I don't think we are, because we're replicating the same thing all the time. And if we don't get some kind of cohesion between elements of psychology, parapsychology, and the scientific community, are we ever going to get any further in trying to understand, trying to get the ontology of what we do or what it's about? I think we've got a long way to go. And this is why I think as well, Craig, we need, we've talked about this many times, but we need a lot more parapsychologists. We need a lot more education in what we do, because our field, even, it was accepted. I think, what was it? The scientific, the society exploration, parapsychology was accepted in that field. But we need more. We need more of our research to be accepted, or at least to be taken seriously, in order for us to start to build bridges between us.
Well, there are some bridges already being built. The Parapsychological Association last year hosted for the first time a continuing education credit for psychology. They hosted a continuing education credit for psychotherapists in the area of anomalous experiences. So the fact that the field of psychology is allowing this is a sign that parapsychology is
Absolutely.
inroads.
Yeah.
And
I think that's what's needed with transpersonal psychology, and that's part of the field of psychology as well. It's a relatively new field, from researchers like Assagioli and Carl Jung, Stanislav Grof. Even I would suggest, not so much Alfred Adler, but it's been a groundbreaking method. It's been a groundbreaking element of psychology to look at that. However, it does miss, if you like, the empirical data, and that's where we need to create bridges, and perhaps maybe there's a sign within clinical parapsychology, which I'm really interested in. Maybe that is a potential bridge that can happen, and to have the PA to do continuing education credits for, I think that's amazing. But we need more. It's not enough, because it's kind of, science is way, they're looming this shadow right over us. And almost pointing a finger at us, that big finger coming down from the sky. But, there's perhaps a little light coming through the clouds, but we need more of it. We need to educate the public more. And we need to educate the public in a way that allows them to understand it, which is one of the reasons why we're bringing out Parawise in an easier form, because if the public can't be educated to understand something in an easier way, they're just going to take whatever the skeptics say.
Yeah. Now, to that end, in terms of the empirical evidence, there are two things that have pushed psychology along. One of them was Daryl Bem's study, Feeling the Future, which was published in a psychology journal.
And that was controversial.
It was a very reputable journal. And the studies were deemed to be absolutely ideal, which is the only reason he got published. And this has been a controversy ever since. And skeptics have been trying to discredit it in any way they can find. But the field of psychology did notice, and it has cracked the door open just a little bit, and things are easing up on that side. The other thing that happened was Etzel Cardeña published the paper in 2018 on the experimental evidence for psychic ability. It's been cited, I think, in 50 different papers.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's a great paper. Actually, I've studied that paper myself, and I'd recommend anybody to read it. We'll link it below.
Yeah. So these things had an effect on the field. Oh, that was also published in a psychology journal.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So these things have had an effect on the field of psychology, that more people are understanding that there is empirical evidence, and it is moving things forward. The issue is always the what I would call emotional skepticism versus scientific skepticism, and that people are reacting to an emotional side.
That's driven by the emotional bias, to be honest.
Yeah, driven by emotion. That's been really clear in my studies of skepticism. This is all emotionally driven, and it's affecting their logical processes on this particular subject. This doesn't mean that skeptics are crazy. What it means is that on this particular subject, when you're looking at psychic ability, they tend to go off track because there's something deeply disturbing about it for them.
I think, I mean, you're right. I mean, I think it is deeply disturbing because at the end of the day, if your whole world is shattered from what your expectations are and your perceptions are, it is going to frighten you. It is going to put you, and it's, there's an element as well of the, I could have been wrong and I'm going to be judged as well. It's this whole, if I cross over to the other side, am I screwed kind of thing. I mean, that's me taking it to an extreme, but the reality is it is uncomfortable. And I understand that because at the same token, it's uncomfortable for me to try and be critical and look at some of the experiences that I've had. And so I understand that even we as parapsychologists, researchers, people with psychic ability or mediums, we have our own biases, but I think we're willing and readily open to say, well, I certainly am. Yes, I have a bias and I need to work through that, but I'm willing to look at your data. I'm willing to try and understand that so that I can understand me better. But that doesn't happen on the other side of the coin.
No, and that's an interesting thing about the approach. So, for example, when I was starting to learn about parapsychology, I remember specifically having the idea that I felt that psychic ability was real and that the skeptics had to prove themselves. This was the point. This was the point of view that I was coming from, and I was very clear that this was my particular bias in going into it. What this meant in terms of my research was that I took an entirely different approach that the skeptics normally do, which is to say that to me, it was the skeptics that had to prove their point more than anybody else, because the idea that psychic ability didn't exist was a very low probability in my mind. So the skeptics would actually have to go to extra trouble to prove their point that it didn't exist. Taking that point of view, this meant that every time I looked at an argument about that skeptics made, I would go look for the rebuttal. And oftentimes, so from a journalistic perspective, rebuttals are hard to find. They're not in they're generally not in popular articles like the Skepticism is. They're often in scientific papers. They're on somebody's blog, but they're kind of just out of the way. And oftentimes, the skeptics, even when they know that these rebuttals exist, won't link to them because pettiness.
That's why we publish them, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. We're happy, but
yeah. So there's a certain amount of pettiness involved, and so I knew to go look for these rebuttals because it turns out there always is one. Anytime there's a scientific disagreement within parapsychology, there's a rebuttal. You just have to go find it. It takes some digging, and once you find it, it tends to change the discussion substantially, because this is when you find out what's really going on. Rebuttals are amazing for that, in that you see this entirely different skeptical point of view when you see the first argument from them, and then when the people that are rebutting that argument start taking it down, it's like, oh wow, so this was wrong and that was wrong and that was wrong and that was wrong and that was and you realize that the skeptics are relying a lot on other people's ignorance to push their points across, as Jock was making the point earlier.
Actually, I remember the first rebuttal I ever wrote. That was the first rebuttal I wrote in PDN called "Defending the Soul," which and of course there's the split brain argument as well, where we still see anomalous phenomena. We still see evidence of consciousness continuing as well. So there's still a lot that we can do, and I think it's important as well. You're coming from a journalistic side of things, Craig, that people understand how you approach your journalistic approach to taking some of these studies and writing about it. And
well, yeah, I mean, at this point, when I write about the studies, I write about them as though they're ordinary science. And it seems to me that this is the proper approach, because really it is ordinary science. People are doing things in an ordinary scientific fashion. the idea that parapsychologists do something differently than the rest of the world, that somehow their science is inferior, doesn't bear up when you see the actual studies. I mean, this is just, you can just see it if you engage with the actual studies. And in fact, Chris French never brings up the argument that parapsychology is inferior because he knows better. He's engaged
and
with
in
it.
the same token, they've never been able to prove that psychic ability doesn't exist, or that anomalous phenomena doesn't exist. They just say
that's science.
the
Really
data
can't
is
do
there,
that
it
anyway.
doesn't exist, but there's no proof of it. They don't have any empirical evidence that it doesn't.
Well, what they'll say is that it's never been proven, which that's
just a crutch, though. That's just...
right. And to do that, they have to ignore a great deal of data dating back to the 1800s.
You find as well that the scientific community do not actually. I've seen arguments that have been happening, and when you ask them if they've actually read the data, they haven't. They haven't studied the data. A lot of these skeptics, there are skeptical people in science that have read the data, and like Chris French, and they're open to it. And Richard Wiseman, who's understand the data, he maybe can't replicate some of it, but he does try to look at the data. But there's others that just will come out and they don't understand it. They've never read Cardeña's paper. They've never read the Staring studies. They've never looked at the Gansfeld studies, and they've never looked at any other studies that's out there. Feeling the future, is it? A lot of the skeptics that are out there screaming, like for instance in the forum that you were in, they probably haven't read that data.
Oh no. In fact, this is really common among these, I'll call them scoffers. This is really common among the scoffers, that they don't read any of the data. They're operating
in
from
the army,
a position.
Scoffers.
Yeah, scoffers. They are operating from a position of abject ignorance. And so what you've seen from the conspiracy community is they're saying, do some fucking research. Which, you can understand their point of view. Now, that doesn't mean that the conspiracy community is right, because oftentimes what they're using for evidence is dodgy at best.
Well,
but this doesn't mean
that's another episode, because the conspiracy theorists do my head in, because the conspiracy theorists make things fit. They will find a way to make it fit no matter what you do.
Right. I don't generally go for conspiracy stuff,
no.
not because I think that the conspiracies don't exist. Corruption exists, so yes, conspiracies exist, right?
Yeah, but they don't have any evidence. Most of the time, they've got no evidence.
Well, and you chase it down, and you find a little bit here, a little bit there, but nothing.
Fits.
There's no smoking gun, nothing of substance. Just a lot of speculation, so it's not worth chasing down. But the point is that you need to do some of your own research if you're going to understand where the other person's coming from. And this applies especially to skeptics, is they need to do some research.
I think this is why we also need citizen parapsychologists, and you and I are bringing Brian Lath on. We're going to be doing an episode with him, talking about Ghosted from the review that we did. And I think this is the reason why we really need to educate the public, and we need to be able to educate them in the studies and in parapsychology, in anomalous phenomena, and what is I don't want to say what is real and what is illusion, because I don't want to go into the whole showmanship and everything of what's out there for the paranormal, but we need to educate them in proper procedure and research protocols and what we can expect through the data. And I think that would make better citizen parapsychologists, citizen scientists, for instance.
Parapsychology is an excellent field for understanding the challenges of science. It is a difficult field to start with, and with all of the controversy, it forces you to look at different points of view and how different philosophies can guide entirely different takes on exactly the same evidence. All these things are relatively important for understanding science in general.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I totally 100% agree with you. Craig, where do we go? Where do we go from here? We're getting, I mean, do you think we're going to get to the point where we'll see some synergy between our camps? I mean, we're seeing light coming through the clouds. Do you think it's going to get any better?
Well, so there's two sides, right? There's actual skeptics and the scoffers. So the scoffers will be won over when absolutely everybody else in the world accepts the evidence. When the entire world accepts the evidence and it's now safe to believe in it, then they'll go ahead and jump on board, but not until then. And some of them have said this directly, that they will only accept parapsychology when it's accepted by the general scientific community, whatever the heck that is.
This is why we have a really big job at PDN. This is why we're doing what we do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that are interested in promoting parapsychology in the world of psychic ability, there's an important saying by the Dutch, and that is that the dogs bark, but the caravan moves on. And that is to say,
brilliant.
yeah, and that is to say that you simply keep providing the evidence and you
Yeah.
keep forcing the skeptics to confront it, because all they have is disagreement. All they have is negativity. And if you keep forcing them to provide nothing but negativity and talking points, then eventually, other people will catch on that they're not providing anything, they're not bringing anything to the party. That the skepticism is really just denial, and there's no meat behind it. They can't trace this denial back to anything specific. There's nothing concrete for them to grab on. They're just repeating talking points. And this only becomes clear through repetition, which means that you keep pushing these issues out there and keep forcing them to engage with it, and then let the rest of the world watch what happens.
Absolutely. Craig, this has been a great discussion. I'm glad that we jumped on to do this. And guys, if you're interested, go and check out Paranormal Daily News. We've got some excellent articles there. And we also got a community which has got some great people in there, some great parapsychologists, some very well-known parapsychologists. That community is small, it's private. If you want to join, you're more than welcome to join. We do make sure that you have your full name. We can check out your social media. We know exactly who you are because it is a safe space. It's a place for education and for people to get together that are interested in education, interested in learning more about this field. We'll put that link below, whether you're watching it on YouTube or whether you're listening to this podcast. We'll put a link there so you can come and join us. We'd love to have you. We've got lots coming up. We've got great masterclasses coming up, great speakers that's coming up. This is about education in a safe environment where we can discuss and debate different things as well. And we're really excited about the future. There's fantastic articles out there. And of course, here's the other thing. If you're a skeptical person, if you're even a scientist who's now changed their point of view or changed their direction because you've had an anomalous experience and you've never wanted to speak up, then please connect with us because we would love to hear from a lot of you out there who are skeptics, either professionally in science or you were a skeptic and you had an experience that kind of rocked your world, that changed the whole paradigm of your belief. Then we'd like to hear from you. Drop us a message, drop us a voicemail, email us at Paranormal Daily News. We'd love to hear from you because this is good information, not only to get discussions going, but to see exactly, the trend. If there's people out there that are still hiding because they don't want to be attacked or they don't want to be laughed at, we're certainly not going to do that. We're just interested in the data. And perhaps at PDN, we'll be doing our own research at some point. Certainly, that's the way that I'm heading for sure. And these conversations are great. Make sure to join us on the Deadly Departed podcast. And Craig, fascinating conversation. There's a lot to do. Will you be going into Reddit anytime soon, or will you just give it a miss now?
Yeah, I will eventually be back. Just sort of out of curiosity. I don't get too worked up over people insulting
No.
me. It's just not really a big deal to me. So yeah, I'll be back at some point. It's like I said, it's kind of interesting. Also, I've been sharing the information there with a researcher, Claire Murphy Morgan, who is studying skepticism and has been collecting these arguments for her own studies.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to be interviewed by her soon as well. So, guys, thank you for joining us once again on Deadly Depart. If you've got any questions, then reach out to us, please. We've got some great guests coming out. Again, I said Brian Lath is going to be on the show where we're going to be discussing that work as well. And we've got some fantastic guests that are going to be coming up. Jack Hunter and Matt from Aleph is who I met over there. And we're going to be discussing his new book, which, in fact, actually, I thought Matt was a skeptic, and I had to, when I was chatting the other day, I had to hold my hand up and saying, "Okay, you're not," and that was my bias for making that judgment. So we've got some great guests coming up. I'm hoping to get Steve Parsons back as well. He's been on the show before, and also there's other guests that we're going to be bringing back as well. So lots coming up, guys. Please keep joining us. Craig and I will be back very soon. We'll be going on to another subject matter, and keep in touch. If you've got any questions, reach out. God bless.